I'm Lindsay Sturkey, and welcome to Simple Spiritual Practices. In each episode of this podcast, we'll talk about one tangible practice that will help you know yourself and God better. Most of these practices can be done in 5 minutes or less, so you can easily try it out today. If you are ready to experience real growth in your life, or if you want fresh ideas on how to approach your time with God, this podcast is for you. I felt it again this morning. I sat in the quiet, and a familiar feeling of angst started to stir in me that made me feel just a little unsettled. I was sitting with some of those big life questions that make me wonder if I'm missing it somehow, whatever it is supposed to be. I wonder if I'm doing it all wrong, if I'm making the wrong choices and decisions. So whenever I notice this type of all or nothing thinking, I know I need to pause and get a little perspective because it's very unlikely that I'm doing it all wrong. But I was carrying some questions such as, what am I actually doing with my life? And am I doing enough? I was carrying this weight that made me wonder if I was not living the life that I'm supposed to be living. What if I'm missing out on what I should be doing? Have you ever felt that way? Now, this isn't a new feeling for me. I feel this way sometimes, especially those days when the mundane routines kind of start to feel meaningless. And then I start to wonder if my life isn't big enough or significant enough. I felt this way often in high school as I looked ahead to the future and thought about that all-important question, what do I want to do with my life? And what's God's will for me? Sometimes when we're stuck in kind of the monotonous routines of our days, those questions rise up for us again, and they can speak pretty loud. Am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing with my life? Or is there more? So for me, a lot of time it goes back to that desire to know God's will for my life. I just want to know that I'm doing what God wants me to do. So growing up, I was kind of obsessed with this idea. I wanted to know God's will and His plan. I was seeking Him for where I should go to college, what career I should pursue, who I would marry, where I would live. And it's good to want to know what God wants for us in that. But it's like I thought there was one right answer for all of these things, and I just had to figure it out. And if I didn't make all the right choices and decisions, if I didn't live my life in the exact right way, taking the perfect right steps, then maybe I feared I would miss it. So my husband, Tyler, has talked about similar anxieties he's had about figuring out God's will for his life. So back before he came to New Hope, a few months before that, when he was still trying to figure out what came next for him in ministry, he was meeting with his mentor and expressing some of his fears. He said, what if he made the wrong decision and completely messed up God's will for his life? And as he posed that question to his mentor looked at him and said, wow, do you really think you're that powerful? That one decision you make can completely ruin God's will for your life? Point taken, right? That would be pretty powerful if we could do that. Yet how often do we live in fear that we are messing it up, that one wrong decision or misstep will completely ruin what God has for us? There's a quote I saw on Instagram recently from Bob Goff, who is an incredible author and speaker and just an all-around amazing human being. And here's what Bob said. What if we found out God's big plan for our lives is that we wouldn't spend so much of our time trying to figure out a big plan for our lives? Perhaps He just wants us to love Him and love each other. Wow, I mean, that's it, right? That's the whole point. And not only does Bob Goff tell us that, but Jesus Himself says the same thing. When asked what the greatest commandment was, this is how Jesus responds in Matthew 22:37-40. Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these 2 commandments. We are so worried about what we're supposed to do with our lives, what the big plan is, what God's will is. But Jesus makes it very simple. Love God and love people. And there are a lot of ways that might look in our lives. And it doesn't always appear big or feel significant. See, sometimes we're so focused on the big plan that we miss out on the small opportunities to simply love. So maybe it's not about figuring out the big life plan after all, but about finding ways to love in whatever ways our day unfolds today. I want to invite you to consider with me today, what if we didn't spend so much time trying to figure out a big plan for our lives? Because at least for me, sometimes I am so focused on what's coming next that I miss out on what's now. It's hard to be present to my life today if I'm always looking ahead. When I keep looking outside of my own life to see what I'm missing, what I actually end up missing is the beauty of my own life, exactly as it is right now. With all the talk these days about doing big things and having big dreams, my fear is that we're missing the significance of the small things, or what we consider to be small things anyway. Lately, when I feel this angst begin to rise up that I talked about earlier, this question of, am I doing enough? I feel this gentle and quiet invitation to settle into my life as it is right now, to not push ahead or make it happen or chase a big dream, but to recognize that my life and the things that fill my days right now are incredibly valuable and significant. And if I'm so focused on pursuing more, I will miss out on what I do have. Now, there is a time and a season for dreaming big. That's not necessarily a bad thing to do. And if you're in that season, I don't want to discourage you from pursuing whatever God's calling you to. But even if you are in a place of dreaming of what's next, I want to encourage you to also keep your eyes on what is now. Know that where you are now matters, and it's enough. There is still an invitation to grow and to evolve as people, even as we settle into our life as it is now. But growth does not have to mean change. Because we talk about self-improvement, becoming better people, and a lot of times we think that means we have to make these big, dramatic life changes. But what if growth doesn't mean changing our lives, but growing deeper into the life that is already ours? See, I do want to grow, but I want to do it in a way that allows me to be more truly myself for the life that is mine now. Not to try to expand beyond it, to do greater things and pursue bigger dreams. Growth for me, at least right now, doesn't mean changing everything, but becoming more loving and present to the people and the life that are mine today. Because I can tend to be so focused on the big plan that I miss out on the life that is already mine now. So instead of changing our entire lives, looking for the big plan, what if we embrace the life that is ours? So let's hear this invitation to settle in and grow our roots down deep instead of pushing ourselves forward, eager to get to what's next. Because maybe growth is more about where you are than where you are going. And growth does not always have to mean change. There is significance and purpose in the everyday, and we don't have to constantly push to be more in order for growth to happen, because we can grow right where we're planted, growing our roots down deep instead of pushing ahead to something different. So, if you find yourself feeling angst about what you're supposed to be doing with your life, worried that you're missing it somehow, slow down, take a deep breath, and look around at the life that is already yours. What does it look like to love God and love people right where you're at? Begin there, grow down deep where your roots are already buried in the ground, and watch God grow your life right where you stand. because maybe we are right where we're supposed to be. And as we pay attention to what God is already doing now, He will show us if there's a next step to be taken, and we will know if and when it's time to move forward into something new. But movement and growth are happening right now, with or without the big plan. And growth does not always require change. So let's grow down deep right where we are and settle into the beautiful life that is already ours. As we close today, I want to invite you to reflect on a few questions that can help you think about where you're at right now. This is going to be a practice of noticing and naming what it means to grow down deep where you are instead of always pushing ahead to what's next. So as I read these questions, I'm going to leave a little bit of space for you to reflect, but I really encourage you to come back to them later. I'll have these questions in the show notes and on my website. And if you notice something stirring in you with these, make sure to revisit it later and give it a little more space. So first, think about your life as it is right now. Name your people, your work, the everyday tasks and routines that make up your days. What does a typical day hold for you? Second, as you consider your days, do you believe that your life is enough just as it is right now? Do you believe that you are enough? Third, what would it look like to grow in loving God and people in your life as it is right now? How do you feel when you hear this statement? Maybe you are exactly where you are supposed to be. How does that hit you? Is that hard for you to believe? Does that bring relief or anxiety? Bring all of those feelings into God's presence and see what He might have to show you. Maybe you are exactly where you are supposed to be. Finally, ask God to show you the significance and purpose in how you spend your time. Rest in His presence, trusting that what you do matters. Surrender any angst or anxiety that you are carrying about the future, and trust that if something does need to change, God will show you in His timing. I pray that this invitation to stop worrying about the big plan for your life will help you release your anxiety about the future, and that you'll become more aware of how God is inviting you to live and love right where you're at today. Thanks for joining me today for this episode of Simple Spiritual Practices. If you want to download a free printable for this week's practice or find other resources to help you take next steps, visit lindsaysterkey.com/free. This podcast is part of the New Hope Podcast Network, and production is done by Darren Hansen. You can check out all the podcasts on the network by visiting newhopechurch.cc/listen. Make sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you don't miss an episode, and we'll be back with a new episode next week.